Mary? Howard County and Mary doing?
They're fine.
Okay, I'll tell them I said hello.
Okay.
If you go out, good luck with it. If you go out hunting, good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Same with you.
Thanks.
Okay. We're now back in session. Thank you. As we move down to our resolutions, I want to bring up resolution 2020-86, racism is a public health crisis. What we're going to do is table that. I've had a discussion with Bob, who is the chair of the legislative committee. What we'd like to do, it's too important a topic not to give it a broader discussion. And what I'd like to do is have some discussion and bring in some speakers and educate the county board and let's ask questions and have a broader discussion on it. And then at some point in the future, bring back this resolution. So Bob, would you like to make a motion to table?
I'll make a motion to table that resolution.
I'll second that.
Okay. On a voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Renee, right. Thank you.
Aye.
Yes. Resolution 2020-75 appointments to committees, commissions, and/or boards.
Sure, just on page 12 and 13 in your packet, we just have the next appointments. We have those individuals listed on page 13 for CCS and then the children's COP names along with their descriptions of qualifications listed below.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2020-75.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution 2020-76, approval of gift grant and or donation to the Door County Sheriff's Office from Keller Incorporated. Joel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution 2020-76.
Second.
Explanation?
Yeah, as identified in line 22 for $2,500 to the Sheriff's Department for community initiatives. I think this is the second, if not the third year that we've gotten this from Keller.
So I guess I'm a little confused. If our authority is $5,000 or less, why are we bringing forward $2,500 to the board?
FYI.
No, I asked the same question, but since I wasn't at the committee and it came out of committee, we just kept it up. It does no harm, but yeah, under our rules, it doesn't need to come to county board.
Well, we have a resolution, we have a motion and a second, so we'll go through the process. But just for future reference, remember, committees can do up to $49.99 of their own motion. So we will go to the board. I'm sorry. Vinny.
Sorry, this was on the last tabling. I'm just wondering if we're using the voting board for all the resolutions. I just wanted to, I did not agree that we should table it, but I couldn't be heard. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the discussion and the reminder that we committees are now able to approve purchases or I should say donations of up to $49.99. Again, I'll go back to a comment I made when we discussed this another time. If committee chairs could remember to, I still think $4,000 is a lot of money, sort of thing. And if committee chairs could remember in committee reports to maybe bring this sort of stuff up so that we can stay apprised. I mean, it's hard to read everybody's committee meeting minutes. So I do appreciate the fact that this is coming in front of us, even though it's less than 5,000. Thank you.
Kara?
Yes. Hey, I wanted to say that I did request to speak before the motion was made on the 86 one. And I wasn't sure if we were allowed to do that, but my button had already been pressed before that. So I don't know if that, I feel like it was rushed through? Were we allowed to speak before the motion was made?
I'm sorry, I didn't see that on the board.
Okay, it stayed up there for a little bit and I never canceled it.
Yeah.
I'm taking a look now. My recollection, it is debatable, but I want to make sure.
Motion on the floor. If this motion on the floor,
Actually, yeah, a tabling motion has the power to halt consideration of a question immediately without debate. So debate could be allowed, but it would be up to the.
I pressed it before the motion was made to table or to table it.
Okay, again, Kara, I'm sorry, I didn't see it on the board. I'm looking at 4 different screens up here, but I didn't see it, sorry.
Right.
She was on there, and when we go on to the next one, it clears her request out.
So, yeah, once the motion was made to table, it was seconded, and debate would not have to be allowed on the tabling motion. They can go right to the question. So it doesn't say there can't be debate, but it would be left to, I guess.
But before Bob made the motion to table it, I had pressed my button before that. I'm just wondering if we were allowed to say anything.
The matter wouldn't be properly before the board before you have the motion in a second. That will then open it up.
So in that case, the question would not be heard.
Right, and it wasn't even a question as much as a statement of, hey, we need this on the record of why we're tabling it, because I was informed before the meeting started that it was because certain board members didn't want to appear racist. So I would like that in the record, because I don't feel like this is...
You're out of order, Kara, at this point in time. The motion was voted on, it was approved. I will explain to you, I did have a conversation with Bob and with the administrator prior to the meeting, that there were a number of questions that were raised by a number of individuals. And as a result of that, the discussion with Bob, I felt that it was too important of a question, not have a broader discussion and have more education for everybody here in the board, rather than just 1 or 2 people. The legislative committee worked on it for several months, and I wanted that same opportunity to be spread to everybody at the board. And that was the scope of the discussion. Back to business now. We have a motion and a second on the floor for discussion.
I know the rule says that you shouldn't bring it before, don't have to bring it before the county board. But when you got a sizable donation, it comes before the board, it gets recognized. And maybe there'll be some mechanism that when we do get a sizable, that still comes before the full county board, so they get a little advertisement for it, or whatever you want to call it.
We have, again, we modified the rules simply because of the number of donations that are smaller. And we do recognize everyone through our annual report that we provide on all their donations. So again, these are our rules. The rules are coming up next week or on the 10th. If you want to modify them, we can do that. But I guess,
if I were given first, the recognition is buried in the report at the end of the year, and when someone gives a sizable donation, And then $5,000 is what I consider. I understand why $5,000 is, I understand it, but somehow we gotta recognize beyond the committee level that someone is given $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 other than at the end of the year.
So what if we did a monthly donation report?
Okay, something like that. I'm just saying.
It's very simple.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I'm.
And I point out again, the rule of order doesn't prohibit.
Yeah.
It says that they may accept it, and they can, a subunit could refer something on the county board, but, or we could do a monthly report, it would be entirely up to the committee.
Susan?
So I'm gonna agree with what your suggestion was, and maybe that monthly report could just be attached to the end of the administrator's.
Other than that, the document.
Great, thank you.
Any other discussion? Since it involves money, we go to the voter board. Lauren, yeah.
Some way or another, I lost my ability to connect the voter board.
You gotta click on it.
Click on the Capitol building. Are you out of the, is he still logged in?
Thank you.
Here we go. That's passed on the vote of 21 yes. Thank you. Resolution 2020-77, land use agreement, dry fire hydrant, Forestville Dam County Park. Dan.
I'll make that motion to approve that resolution.
I'll second that.
Okay, hold on. So we're getting motions by buttons and we're getting motions by voice, so we need to do one or the other. Please,
We should do my button, please.
thank you. So we have a
So we have a
motion.
motion, we need a second on it via the button. Here we go. Thank you. Explanation?
Well, I got a question to ask you. When this came out of the committee, there was a question whether they would agree.
I can explain.
Has that been taken care of?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So what's before you here is a request, or it was a request by the fire department to again have a dry access point by the Forestville Mill Pond. They went through the process of going through the design work, getting the approvals through the DNR, and then I'm also working through an agreement. The agreement went back and forth. It did have one provision that Facilities and Parks did not agree with, and it was a motion that the Facilities and Parks that it would only come forward if they dropped that stipulation, which they have dropped. So the agreement that's before you is, I guess, what was passed by Facilities and Parks with the portion that was not acceptable removed. And this is before you now for consideration. Grant, I don't know anything else, but.
No, and the reason, paragraph 7 is highlighted on the land use agreement is that is the additional language that they suggested that we amend and agreed to amend.
It's on 30 days written.
It's on what?
It should, A should go upon 30 days written notice, not just 30.
Any other discussions?
Just for my education, is this draw water out of the pond? Is that this dry hydrant? Okay, so it's not a well. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Now we'll go to the voter board.
Sorry.
That's passed and voted 21 yes, 0 nay. Thank you.
I question now the second, the first and the second, I think I made the
No, they,
No, you didn't.
we didn't do it by bucket.
You didn't do it by the bucket.
We're gonna do it by the-
Okay,
Resolution 2020-78, acceptance of grant for financial assistance to procure ADA kayak launch. Dan.
well, do I have the first?
Yes.
Okay. I did it.
Too late.
Okay. That's the money to put a kayak thing at Company Park, really. It's money for that.
So just for quick context, the grant is for ADA launch access at Carmody. It's a grant, estimated amount is at $6,308. And it's a match of 50%. The other half of the match would come out of our county boat launch fee.
David.
Thank you. Since this is a relatively new venture for us, a new installation in one of our parks, that I'm all for. I mean, kayaking is a major activity throughout the world. I'd like that if there's some way we can sort of indirectly monitor just how often it really gets used and by what kinds of individuals are using it, so we can get a better feel for the logic of extending this out into other parks and other activities that we have. Thank you.
Bob.
Thank you. Following up on Mr. Engel's comment and question, was Carmody picked for a reason? Do we think that the park, was there some sort of request? Was it friends group? I'm just curious, because like David said, there's other places that could potentially use this type of facility. I'm just curious why Carmody. And again, I'm totally all for it. This is a great thing. I just wanted more information. Thank you.
I can just tell you it's been discussed at facilities and parks, and Carmody was one of the areas identified both through, I guess, requests, but also some discussions with, I believe, one of the townships in terms of having that opportunity. And that was one of the first areas identified just in terms of potential, I guess, logistics with the ADA access in our peers. So that's why it was selected.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great that we have ADA access, that these ADA compliant kayak launches are, make it easier for everybody to get in and out of the water. So they're really great things. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think the reason it was Company Park, and Susan was the one that brought it up and suggested it, if I remember correctly.
No, not me. Nancy. Nancy.
You? Oh, Nancy.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of people, that have a kayak like on the roof of their car, they are parked in the parking lot and then they just walk down and put it in the water. Do they have to pay the launch fee?
Yes.
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 I would think so.
Is that an official answer? Is it yes or no?
From my experience, we've paid the launch fees, yes.
Berg, I'm gonna unmute you, Berg. Could you answer that question, please? So Berg was there, but he's not answering. Let me try Wade, 1 second. Wade, are you there? Could you answer that question? I don't have either one.
We'll have to look into that for you guys. Get an answer.
Well, they don't have a trailer behind their car.
Depends.
When they're being checked on by the Parks Department, whether or not they paid, it's, kind of up in the air.
I'll check on that issue, but I mean, that's separate from the donation we're considering right now, but I will check on that information for you.
Thank you.
Nancy?
I was just going to answer Bob's question, and Carmody Park was picked because Little Sturgeon Bay is very calm and very easy for a launch to be tried out on.
Okay.
Thank you. I know this topic came up before, but I just didn't know how we address this with kayak tour companies. If someone's launching 25 kayaks, does each person pay a launch fee? Or does the company pay one large one? I don't have a preference one way or the other, but just thought it'd be worth clarifying if we're charging individuals that a company with, 15 or 20 kayaks should have the same charge.
Again, I will get back to the board in terms of whether or not we charge for launches for kayak.
Biz?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. In talking with Randy Halstead, the chairman of the town of Jacksonport, they have a town park, shower park in their town, and that's a really hot spot for launching the kayaks for those that want to go down off of Cave Point. And he told me that this is a huge, huge revenue for the town of Jacksonport. They charge for every kayak that goes in the water, and they make a lot of money there at the town level. So, this is a county park, so that's why I'm interested in whether they can. Thank you.
David?
To Supervisor Shomo and then Supervisor Burley. He mentioned that what I was going to make a comment of, but the real point is a lot of municipalities do in fact charge businesses for the use of their public parks per and if it gets to that point, I think maybe Door County really needs to consider that as well. Keep in mind though, we have a lot of charter fishermen that go out with a single boat that might fit in that same category, and I don't believe any municipalities charge for those individuals using their dock access, but I'm not sure of that one.
Anybody else? Okay, so you're going to get back to us on these charges for individual commercial. We will go to the voter board. Let's pass on voter 21 yes, 0 nay. Thank you. Resolution 2020-79, acquisition of real property for public park purposes. Dan.
That time I beat you, Dan.
I was waiting till David to quit talking before I made the motion. This is at the South Park. We have a problem with erosion of the bay.
This is Meridian.
Oh, this is really great. Let me get up to it. I was so intent on making the motion, I didn't stop. This is a piece of property, Meridian Park is in Jacksonport. This is a piece of property to add on to that part of the property, the northern end of it. And we're trying to purchase it through grants and et cetera.
That's it. David.
I seem to speak a lot. On this topic, we had quite a few discussions of a sliver of easement agreement between along down to the shore. I want to make sure the general public listening to this and it gets in the record that sliver of easement is not like a guaranteed trail down for the public to use. If the corporation council could remind us of what the intent of that sliver is, so that we, all 21 of us here, understand what we are thinking at this moment in time during the acquisition of this property.
As briefly as I can, the grant of easement, which starts on page 26 of your packet, describes the easement that runs down to the shoreline. And what you have to look at when interpreting an easement is first the written document. And this document is fairly well crafted. It speaks to the character of the easement, a description of the easement, and the location of the easement. And it is expressly conditioned on the reasonable exercise of the easement consistent with its character. So what I have tried to do when I've spoken on this topic is disabuse anybody of the notion that this is going to be allowed to have a public beach at Meridian Park. This does grant Door County access to the shoreline. What that access might look like is going to be dependent on what the Facilities and Parks Committee sees as its vision. It could be used for research. It could be used for like a permit system like they have at the Boundary Waters will allow maybe 6 members of the public, I'm picking things out of the air at this point, to go down. But what's important to recognize, so it gets out, I think, in the public sphere is, in my estimation, this easement would not allow county to create a public park on the shoreline by virtue of this easement. It allows us to access the shoreline, but it's got to be a reasonable access in nature with the character of the easement, which at its core was an agreement between a bunch of neighbors to allow the neighbors that didn't have riparian property access to the shoreline.
Thank you.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the easement defined? I mean, is it actually a certain pathway or something? I don't see it on the map that's provided.
It's not on the map provided, but there is a description of the easement in the easement document itself. And I don't know if I included it here the meets and bounds description. So yeah, there is a meets and bounds description in the easement document itself, but it's not shown on the map.
It is. It's that little purple line.
No.
But it's essentially an unimproved walking path, walking track for pedestrian access only.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an acquisition to purchase real estate property. And under the fiscal impact, do we have the donation, gifts, or grants to complete this at this time?
I can explain. What you're approving today is the county's acquisition of this 4-acre parcel to add to Meridian Park, but there are a number of conditions precedent before we could actually pull the trigger on the sale. So the county's obligations include the transaction is conditioned upon the County Board of Supervisors approval of the purchase of the premise by adoption of a resolution on or before December 31st, 2020. The resolution before you today will satisfy that. The second one that gets the business question is the availability of donation, gifts, or grants sufficient to fully fund the county's acquisition of the premises on or before April 1, 2021, and having that money in hand and being able to close by July 1st, 2021. So,
thank you very much.
Any other questions? We will go to the vote board. That's passed on the vote of 21 yes, 0 nay. Thank you. Resolution 2020-80, acceptance of the monetary gift from Friends of the Door County Parks for LaSalle County Parks Shoreline Protection. Dan.
I won this time. At LaSalle Park, there's a course along the shore, and this is to a gift from the Friends of the Park to help pay for part of this. Coming up will be a resolution to get some extra money from the Finance Committee to do more than just the first, I think it's 50 feet.
So, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I definitely appreciate all the work that the Parks Department does and the Parks and Facilities Committee do to oversee these assets. I will be voting against this for the simple fact that There is an exposure there, and the shoreline is eroding. For people that don't know, LaSalle, it's right on the Lake Michigan. The lower part is right on Lake Michigan shoreline. And yes, the high water is eroding the clay banks. That's what we call the town of clay banks. Clay banks because along there's a lot of glacial deposits. There's actually a buried forest horizon there that's almost 12,000 years old. It's extremely well exposed right now. Any riprap is going to bury that. The parking lot as it stands is currently protected by riprap. I know that it sounds like there's not the plan to riprap the entire thing, just to do a little bit more riprapping. But at a price tag of $52,000, we could rebuild the parking lot for that. So I guess I'm just offering caution or wishing for caution here and hoping that we can just let nature do its thing a little bit and figure out a way to preserve and protect this this rare formation. Any questions? I can certainly help answer that. I did try to get some information out to the committee folks. Other people might have other questions, but I just don't think we need to be dumping riprap there right now. Thanks.
Anybody else? Was there, the point that Bob brings up, was that part of any discussion on the committee? Or was that new information?
That's new.
Pardon?
That's new.
That's new information.
That's new information. The reason for putting a riprap there was that it was going to take the parking lot off, the bottom line. And stop the erosion from taking out the parking lot eventually.
Well, let me clarify. So what we looked at, if you're part of the park tour, there is obviously there's more, I think it's close to 200 and some feet total. Actually, I think it's closer to 300 and some feet of park that's down there. There is a portion of about 150 feet that I identified that has gotten hit severely just by the prevailing winds in terms of the amount of erosion. It's still a little bit off from the parking lot. I don't think the parking lot's in imminent danger, but there are areas where we have some significant, I guess landslides that are now occurring. And that's where those landslides now is where Bob is saying we could probably expose some historic features from that standpoint. I guess from what's before you, what they did is they went out for bid for at least trying to preserve that 150 feet. The French group was willing to pay for the first 75. We're trying to get to the full 150 feet just because of the mobilization costs that are there and so forth. This to stabilize that because they were really worried about the impact over winter in ice shelves and everything on the rest of the park. So that's why they're trying to get mobilized and done this year yet. If you want to refer it back, I suppose we could do that and have that discussion. I don't know the impact in terms of the timing would be my only concern. I understand what Bob's saying in terms of having that exposed, but again, depending on what the water levels are, again, I'm just worried about how much does the park be willing to give up to preserve that feature. You know, if they can do the riprap in a certain way to maybe find a balance between preserving some of the shoreline and preserving some of the features that Bob has identified. I do not know. That has to be further discussion, but I think there is some issue with timing in terms of what's going to be the impact over winter.
Susan?
There are a number of people in my district who are very concerned about that park and the erosion. So I've been getting communications from people since, I don't know, maybe since the beginning of this year, maybe even last fall. And there has been a lot of erosion. There are a lot of parts of that shoreline that have been degraded because of it. I was one of the people that got Bob's letter, and I'm wondering if the feature that he's speaking of is perhaps towards the south, because the protection that we talked about in the committee doesn't cover, of course, the whole shoreline, maybe half of it at the most, and it's on the north end. So it may be that that feature is not affected. But just from the sake of the public, they don't like what's happening to that park. And we are really losing a lot of land there.
Joel?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I plead ignorance on having not been there in several years, but if it's money to be spent to protect the parking space and that, I'm supportive of it. But I agree with Bob in the respect of the shoreline and this and that. That's nature's course doing its thing. I will say that 120 years of Army Corps data right now has water levels going down We've hit the peak of all of our cycles, it's diminishing now, so that's a positive thing. But come winter time here, I mean, everybody's correct, the shorelines are gonna take a pounding here before long, predominantly with, these winds coming up the lake on that particular city. But as far as, I'm not sure the exact plan that you guys got, is it, his permit's been acquired and all that already? I mean, this contract's been let out to do it all, so it's ready, get the money and do it. That's a tough one to back off on, but if it means protecting the parking lot, I support that. But as far as the shoreline goes, if there's really damaging stuff happening, we do what we gotta do, but trying to go both ways on this, I guess. I mean, water levels are gonna go down, that's the forecast right now. It's not gonna happen overnight, but that's the trend projected right now.
Laura?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I too have received complaints, just the people that I know are making comments on that park and the shoreline. To clarify the comment that Supervisor spoke about losing the shoreline, it was once covered up, but now with the erosion, this historical area is being exposed. So without ruining it, would you not want to cover it up? And then, because I don't understand it, but if our administrator could pull up an aerial view of what we're speaking about, and we're speaking about the same area that is being commented on, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Wayne or Burke, if you can come up to the front podium, I just want it's worthwhile to have you guys come in.
Okay. Yep, we're on our way.
You guys have control of the Since you did, you have the voting screen.
I'm sorry, I did too.
Yeah, that's what we should do.
Not well enough, evidently. Which questions first? Are we on the sound right now?
Yes, we're going to
Some of it walking through. So what's the specific question on LaSalle?
So just for context, I'll just show on the screen. So here's the parking lot. There is, if you can follow the cursor a little bit, there is some riprap that you can see for a portion of it, but then you also now can see a significant portion. If you're following my cursor here, where you're starting even to see where it had some significant erosion. It covers the entire portion of the park, but you'll see by the parking lot, there's like a bench, but then there's also this area that's gotten hit significantly by both the winds and also obviously the water levels. That's the area, if we're looking at doing the first 150 feet, my understanding from the existing riprap, 150 feet to the south, it does not do the whole portion of the park.
So for a little more history too, let's go back 2 years. There used to be a stairway that went down to the water, so you could access the beach by stairway. So that was washed out 2 years ago already. There are no benches anymore, so we removed those. They would have fallen into the lake, and we probably would have lost those. So we removed them to be placed somewhere else now. And like the administrator said, we're only looking at the first 75 feet is what we went out and sought donations and initial costs for. But then we put our RFP out for an additional 75, so we could see what it would cost for a potential 150 feet of shoreline right there. And it is the corner of the parking lot that we want to make sure we take care of as far as our facilities go. The southern section, which has a much taller, called altitude, if you will, that would cost probably in the 100,000 range to get our 2-to-1 slope that the DNR requires. So down on the other section, we have a less altitude in that landscape there, so we can get our required 2-to-1 that the DNR is looking for, and it kept our costs very low. Actually, I thought I heard someone comment that this was a lot of money, and 50,000 is a lot of money. However, I believe the next bid was in the $60,000 or $70,000 range on the project of 150 feet. So we got a pretty good bid back on this
Wayne, two things. I don't know if you heard the other question. First of all, can you figure out in here how far 150 feet is on the picture? Should you show us that? And secondly, I don't know if you heard Supervisor Boltman's question about the historical significance of the forest that was there.
Yeah, he's called me in the past about that, and then I want to say it was yesterday, the committee received an email, or maybe it was the day before, I'm not sure, where Mr. Boltman is.
He's following.
Oh, sorry.
I'm behind the post.
I got you. So yeah, it is significant, and I understand the significance of that, historic layer that's there. We had a pretty long discussion. I studied some soils when I was at the Lake State University. And so there's a great opportunity for UWGD students, or really anyone, to come up here and do some studies on those soil levels. And that's still going to be available on the south end, as long as waters don't keep coming and we keep sliding into the lake. There are other historic significant values to LaSalle, and part of it obviously is Robert LaSalle, but there was also some Indian groups that had landed there and made camp for a significant period of time. So there are other historic values in that southern section. For your awareness, I guess. And Burke has a lot more details. He's the one who wrote the grant for our matching funds. So we're very confident that we won't have to actually have any taxpayer dollars for this project when we're all done.
So just on the screen that you have, I have it delayed. So go from kind of where the corner of the parking lot is down to where I have the red line kind of coming down and then turning. Then south of that red line would not be done, and that would still remain exposed. It would still have those features that Bob is talking about. So I think you're kind of blending it. So, but.
All right. So I can't see now. I think Bob is next up to speak again.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple thoughts. Again, just from a general standpoint, I encourage us all to be as flexible as we can with nature. I mean, if we can be resilient and be patient, if we can be patient, it aids our resilience, and we end up spending less money and then end up doing less things that we might want to change later. I mean, massive, multi-ton riprap boulders on the shore are really hard to remove if you want to have the beach back potentially. I think what we're really looking at in the long term is regardless, because you can see the riprap by the current parking lot. So again, I mean, the argument being made that the parking lot is mostly protected. Yes, and I don't know if that's the base of the former stairs, but there's a large concrete block that you can see in the image that's actually increasing the erosion just north of it, between it and the southern end of the parking lot there. Probably that once the water does go back down, you will still have your sand and gravel beach, below the riprap. But I think we do have to think about how are we going to access that beach. Right now, it's difficult because the only thing you can do is climb over the slippery and teetery large riprap boulders that are there. And we'll only continue that issue. Obviously, where the challenge is, it is a scarp, it's a drop off. And so not only do people freak out because they see erosion and they think, oh my God, the world's falling, my park is falling away, I have to do something about it. Again, I hope we can temper some of those knee-jerk emotional reactions. We can move benches, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for being proactive and being good managers and good stewards of the park to say, hey, this is eroding, let's move these benches. I know it made some people mad, but it's like they can get over it. The park, benches can be moved. Natural processes are natural processes, and we don't need to go totally crazy over engineering this stuff. And that's just a general statement, minus the fact that there's this incredibly historic layer that's being exposed there. How far that layer goes right through and under the park is unknown. It probably does continue. And it's a really hard thing, because how can geologists study something that's constantly slumping away? And it requires this slumping, as we're experiencing. It requires this severe erosion to actually expose something really historic and really fantastic. So what I wonder is, because the layer, if you go to LaSalle and you climb down the riprap and you walk down the beach right now, you'll see these layers of organic matter. So it's real black. You basically have a buried forest. the glacier made a last little advance about a little over 11,000, between 11 and 12,000 years ago, and buried the spruce and birch forest. And you see logs and roots, and those pieces of wood are over 11,000 years old, almost 12,000 years old. They were preserved because the clay that was scooped up out of the bay basically kept oxygen and prevented them from decomposing. So there's leaf litter, there's bark, there's definitely historical or geologically significant things there for people to study. And of course, as time goes, now that they're exposed, they will eventually decay. And again, it's a really hard thing. How do you show off something that's really neat and yet is completely vulnerable, A, to the erosion and B, to the decay? I wonder, rather than rip-wrapping from the edge of the water all the way to the top of the scarp, can we just put boulders down in the water just to break, to distribute and break down the wave action? I mean, the great example is what they did in Ephraim this last year. They didn't rip-wrap the shore. They made a little bit of rip-wrap, I don't know what you call it. It's not even a jetty, but if anybody drives 42, you come down the big hill by the park, those boulders are out in the water to break up the wave action and to stop the erosion along the highway there. And I just don't see the need to completely rip-wrap the whole thing. So can we maybe put rip-wrap just closer down by the water to break up that, wave action? And then I also would just argue that we shouldn't be rip-wrapping 150 feet of that shoreline. I mean, again, for $50,000, we can realign the parking lot and pave over some of the grass and have the parking lot in a different way and still spend the same amount of money. Anyway, thank you.
Megan?
Thank you very much. I spent quite a bit of time down at that park actually, and it is a really beautiful green space. I think that's probably part of what folks are concerned about is losing that lawn, if you will. And maybe that is some of the motivation behind going to that 150 feet. That being said, I'm not a big fan of lawn personally myself. And it's not, while it is useful, and I think folks prior to COVID at least have been using it for parties and weddings and larger get-togethers and things like that. I think it's probably a much better use of money, whether it's taxpayer dollars or not, to yes, protect the parking lot, but do the bare minimum that we would need to do to achieve that, and let the rest go, the way of the lake rather than fighting with it. I also appreciate the information on the geological aspects of it. That wasn't it's something I've seen, but then I wasn't aware of the details of it. So thanks for that. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. Is I think we should be looking at doing the absolute bare minimum in this case, whatever that would be. And I cannot believe it's 150 feet based on what we were just shown.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Supervisor Gunlickson in that his sources say that the lake is starting to go down. My source of information says that the lake is already 8 to 10 inches lower and projecting to go down. So there's already riprap straight out from the parking lot. And I don't think that we should rush right into this and do more right now. I'm not going to support this. I think that if this turns out, the projections turn out to be wrong and the lake does not start to recede, that next year we could do something, that we should wait and see what happens with these projections that the lake is on its way down. Thank you.
David?
Supervisor Boltman, if we went the first 75, so originally when this came to the committee, there was 75, 150 total projected. 75 currently was the project with an effort to try to do both of them, partly because of the mobilization, and that's what they tried to do the work. If we don't, because that was one of, you bring up a valid concern, and the planet is the planet, and the human race continues to try to fight what it's trying to do. And those of us that have lived in this county for any length of time have certainly seen riprap literally come and go, mostly because of the improper installation of the intent, but Mother Nature will still do what it wants to do with human intervention. If we did just the first 75, because I do value the concept of trying to maintain an infrastructure, in this case, the parking lot. But it is difficult for me to cover back up something that has been exposed that has value. And this is new. We did not know this at Facilities and Parks. If we did the first 75 only, does that leave us any space based on your time down there with product that can be viewed and studied and so forth, while still perceivably saving and helping to preserve the existing parking lot? And
you're asking me a question. Yeah, okay, thank you. Certainly, the exposure gets better the more you go to the south. So when you come onto the shore right near the parking lot, it's kind of nondescript first, and then you start to see further south you go. So when I was there, I honestly didn't measure it. But the Two Creeks Buried Forest Bed is definitely exposed better the further to the south. And as Mr. Spripka mentioned, the elevation actually goes up to the south too. So the scarp gets bigger, everything gets bigger to the south. The exposure gets taller.
The expenses of riprap.
The expenses of riprap get bigger, and the degree to which the Two Creeks Buried Forest Bed is exposed increases. There's more of it exposed to the south for sure. So everything at least aligns in the same direction. Everything. It's a lower scarp on the north end near the parking lot. There's less of the ancient buried forest horizon exposed, and closer to our stuff that's already been riprapped.
Okay, so in my little knowledge of wave action, we all understand what a break wall does. And I have seen and wondered what those boulders were in Ephraim were all about. And that, again, breaks up the wave action. I don't know that would work on the lakeside due to the nature of the forces available there.
Good question.
This question is for Corporation Council then. When we left Facilities and Parks, the intent was basically to go for the entire 150 feet. Is the motion as written possible that, because I look at it this way, I would vote for the 75. But upon with this additional information, I think it's fighting Mother Nature is not always fun. And the green space, the lawn, I'm not a big fan of that as well. Is the ordinance, is this resolution written in a way that we can accomplish doing just the 75 and we're not forced into the 150?
The resolution that's on the floor is to accept the donation from the Friends of the Park. The next resolution would be the next 75 feet. So the motion that's on the floor is this for accepting the donation from the Friends of the Park, which the intent would be for that first 75 feet.
So we could, the ramifications of accepting these monies, and then on the next motion, choosing not to do the extra 75 feet is still plausible.
Correct. You could accept the money from the Friends of the Park, do 75 feet, and then the next resolution turn down funding the next 75 feet.
Okay. So my view would be I'd be in favor of voting for the donated money because there is an infrastructure involved, but I would be in favor of the second half of basically voting no for the second one coming out to revisit the issues that have risen during this meeting. That's all. Thank you.
Sure, please. So I guess just to let everyone know, so 18 months ago, it was at committee, I had made the statement that I'm just going to let Mother Nature do what it's going to do at this park, right? But then as it got worse and worse and we start to lose benches, it was really my duty to bring it forward to protect the infrastructure that we had. And the initial goal was 75 feet, and that's how we talked with the Friends of the Parks group to make sure that we could solidify funds for at least that much that weren't tax levy dollars. When we put the RFP out, we just wanted to have the option and know the numbers of what it would be to do a little bit more. So I'm not married to 150 feet by any degree, but I think we have a duty to do some of it on that north end. What happens, is where the riprap is now, there's wraparound wave effects that will hit that riprap and then come around, and that's most likely why we have such a bad spot right there on the north end. When our neighbor to the south of us decides that they want to fulfill their project, we'll probably have some of that wraparound effect back into the creek that's on the south side of the park. And we'll see that and feel that as waves refract, as they hit shorelines, as they move down shorelines. We normally see that the unexposed area next to any riprap project sees the balance of the wave action, and that's where that erosion will happen. Does that make sense?
And can you show us on the map 75 feet as opposed to the 150 red line? I'll also make a comment that was brought up about the shoreline protection that was put in Ephraim. That was done by the state to protect that portion of Highway 42. And that's what the state DNR put in, was how it's out about 6 or 8 or 10 feet out from the shore is where they put it. And it's actually closed on both ends to prevent that wraparound.
I would think that if we tried to put boulders offshore, that completely changes the scope of the project, and then we're back in that $150,000 range, because then we're coming offshore with a barge and a tug and crews that would place those. We wouldn't be working from the shore side, so the marine application just shoots our costs really, really high.
So the 75 feet, I can do it a little bit more. We can do that. All right. So there's the existing riprap. The 75 feet is right approximately here in that location.
Yeah, so it was approximately where the stairway was the 75 feet. You do notice the concrete that's offshore there. That was many years ago. I think it might have predated Burke's father's time even, where they had a ladder or a gangway or a stairway out to that specific site. That's not what we had to remove. What we had went right to the ground on the beach.
Okay. I guess the discussion is fantastic. So I guess I'm in consensus with where we're kind of going. I guess the only thing I would, and it's not to dispute Bob, the only thing I would suggest is that we should at least consider some portion of that, because the only thing I don't agree is that to reconfigure the parking lot is a whole lot more than 50,000. So there is some value of trying to find a balance of what we're trying to do here today. Obviously we can reconfigure it, but that's the cost. It's because of the placement of the shelter and reconfiguring it at the base and all that and it's the cost of asphalt, all that is, there's value to trying to find a balance. I guess I'm just trying to stress.
Susan.
So what's up there right now is not the whole park, the whole bottom of the park, is it? Because it looks like it's in the same place. Can you possibly show us the whole lower park and where that line would be? Because it looks like it's where it was before with the 150.
The whole, it's kind of hard with the zooming, but the whole park runs from this green line here, or where my cursor is with the red, it goes all the way down.
Your cursor doesn't show up from back here. Oh, there, okay.
So the whole park starts from here. It goes all the way down to this location.
Okay.
The parking lot, you can see is just right at the extension here. 75 feet would be approximately right here. So you still have this whole portion here that's still exposed.
So what I was going to comment before you clarified that, I have mixed feelings, partly because I've heard from people who are upset that erosion is happening, and obviously that's the public and it's our constituents saying we care about not losing this. I understand Bob's and the other comments of other folks as well. And I'm wondering about the timing. I do think we have to do the first piece, the 75. This is new information. We didn't talk about it at facilities and parks. And I don't know that putting it off any other than the 75 any longer allows us even to do anything this fall. But I think it would be nice if we could to have more time to talk about it. Maybe authorize the 75 and then bring it back, if only to talk about, is there something else that could be done that wouldn't disrupt the cliff, whatever, and be able to have a more thoughtful discussion.
Oh, that was an accident. We're the lost next time.
Just, you know, there was a motion to amend that popped up, and I'm just asking the question, does the motion to amend take priority over the discussion? That's it. Okay. And it's been withdrawn, so. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions. I wonder if the donation from the Friends Group, are they expecting the county to pony up the other half, so to speak? If in their mind, are they, no. So it's pretty clear money. They don't have any emotional attachment to what we do or not do. Okay, I think that's important because obviously we want to keep in good, terms and good faith with the Friends Group. Thank you for that. And then I just wonder, is it, can we do 50 feet instead of 75? Am I, and when I look at it, what you can see on the shoreline, because when you look at that, it's hard to see, I've got it on my screen in front of me, but that large concrete block that was the base of ancient stairs, I guess, that's causing, you can kind of see that's causing some of that wave wrap around, and that's that, bad part kind of. So it almost seems to me like just do up to that big old concrete block of stairwell and don't go further. That probably only ends up being about 50 feet or so. But I just wonder if we could reduce, I realize there's a lot of mobilization costs and whatnot, but just a consideration. Thank you.
Let me make a suggestion. Parks meets again before the 10th of November, which is our next board meeting. Perhaps we should refer this back to Parks and bring it back on the 10th and decide whether we do the 75, 150, or something else. Does that cause any big issues on? You're talking 2 weeks.
But the motion on the floor is. So we can.
What's the timing of the mobilization? Can we postpone it to me?
So they were planning on if this all went through today. I spoke to them yesterday and asked, what does your timeline look like for mobilization? They said November 9th they could begin. So the mobilization time for them is not so much a factor. They can do it very quickly. I know they do want to get it done before the ground starts to freeze here and we start getting any significant snowfall. There is a cutoff deadline of the DNR that between the dates of March 15th of 2021 and July 1st, 2021, you cannot place riprap along any shorelines. That's just part of the riprap, whether it's a general permit or an individual permit, which we have an individual permit since it's not like Michigan. That's just a general stipulation in those permits. But I know that the contractor itself would like to get going as soon as possible to avoid that nasty weather that tends to rear its head at the end of November and into December.
Joel?
Yeah, I was on the lines of what Susie and what Ken was saying and Bob, and taking this all in and looking at it and having a little understanding of all this myself. In broad context, the existing riprap that is there for lack of deep conversation is almost the width of the parking lot that's there, protecting that east side of the parking lot. If you take that same exact dimension and you double it and go down to it, it's just about where I believe Bob was saying where the concrete stair is, where it's hard to see on the map, but on the GIS on our laptops, you can really see where it's made a hook and kind of carved in up in the shoreline a little bit. Just south of that, ever so short is the 75-foot mark. And if you rip wrap that part down to there, I think it's kind of a win-win for everybody, because I look at it on Bob's side, 100% agreed. Well, we need to protect that parking lot and what could happen. You know, even though the water's dropping, and that's what trends are saying, you're still going to get its butt kicked this winter time and fall once November gales come here into the winter. And it's not even going to be so much that the waves do it. It's when you get driving ice and all that other stuff that starts eating away as this happens. So I personally think the compromise here is doing the 75-footer, whichever magic number is, 68 feet, 76 feet, whatever it might be, to that little point that comes out there at about the 75-foot mark. And totally understanding where Roberta's saying about contractors, they want to get this done before the weather gets too crappy. I mean, that's the marine world is not fun in that environment. So to me, that's where I would support 100% in doing the 75-foot, 70-foot. If Wayne's in agreement with that, he didn't have a hard set number on it. So I think that's the balance, in my opinion, and that's what I would support right now. And let's just get it going, because we need to protect any further that's going to happen of erosion.
Dave Engelbert?
Okay, I guess I may be a minority here, but it came to finance. We looked at it and said we're protecting 75 feet. It would be important to protect 150. And I guess I would still support that. You know, what Bob brought up, I'm not saying isn't significant, but we have to remember the use of this park. The people there want it for their enjoyment. We're not looking to put it back to the natural state of trees and vegetation. So we need to protect it, but perhaps people have added to the creation of a problem. And I think Wayne is entirely right, saying if you go so far, then the wave action goes beyond that and continues to erode. In the town of Union, we got a half mile or so of town road on the bay shore, and we certainly experienced that erosion and right into and undermining the road problem. Doing one lot or two lots there doesn't solve the problem. You have to do more. I think Susan represents some of the town playthings. Don't? Okay. I believe to the north of LaSalle Park is Lake Michigan Drive.
Yes.
And the town of Claybanks has had real significant problems with erosion at that location. So I don't know, I just think they have a good plan. They looked at the location, and we're not engineers on this county board, but we need to do things to protect that shore. And if this boreal forest is more of it is to the south of even 150 feet, it's still there and available for exploration.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. Question. Of the water frontage of this park, how many feet is that total, all in all? I want to compare what this 75 or 150 feet is. So if there's exposure of, say, trees that are potentially 10,000 years old and people want to go test that soil or look at that, and we have this potential the wave wraparound that they're saying, let's look at this comparison of percentage. Is it a big difference if we're getting a better deal for 150 feet versus doing 75 feet? Because essentially, what Wayne was telling us, there is going to be a wave wraparound. So we could potentially causing a bigger problem just south of that. Should we be doing the 150 feet? So what is that total footage?
Total length, approximately, is what the GIS is 740 feet.
Right, 150 feet of that. Right, so maybe everything that's been brought forward to us is a good comparison. It's been rationalized out on what we're trying to protect at that 150 feet, because that part that we're trying to say more on is where people are using and trying to enjoy. And as somebody, as a supervisor sitting here and hearing constituents complain and want that preserved, I need to go for that, knowing that the majority of it is still exposed and open for people to look, to study, to learn on the other part of the erosion. So I could do a call for question too, or do I got to put my Q in again on a button? I don't know.
I don't want to confuse it anymore, but in the master plan that we just passed through the park's 5-year plan, that park is in position to have a pavilion.
Yeah.
Pretty small price on it. Looks like what's at Forestville. but that would be up between the bathrooms and the kiosk. On the south side of the parking lot, because there is a pretty big need down there. We've heard that a lot. They really like that. They really enjoy that. And the Friends group has earmarked $35,000, I believe, and we have it in a CIP project for the match on that. We just got to find the right engineer to bring our costs down to make the project go forward. So it's just another piece of that park that we're investing in that you should know if you didn't know.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions before we close this. Jenny?
Thank you for the time. The question I have is I've had many constituents either put riprap up on their own shoreline property or not, and then they're impacted by what their neighbors do. So I'm just curious if we know what would be the impact to the two neighboring properties, which I realize this is more than 400 feet, so they're not directly next to the riprap, but they're pretty close. And then if we put it across 75 or 150 feet, wouldn't we be increasing the erosion on both sides of the riprap in the park as well?
No, to the north there, all of those neighbors have riprap on their shoreline. In fact, one redid his project this year because we thought it needed to be redone. And to the south, there is a neighbor there that is in the process of his permits. It's even been requested that they gain access to their property from ours, which we just don't see as a feasible option for that contractor. So to the south, we do have some neighbors that are looking to put some riprap in.
I guess I'm just trying to weigh out if you put it across a section, then the sections right next to it take more erosion. So it just seems like an endless battle, which is kind of why I don't support it, even though I appreciate the engineering and the thoughts behind it.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This study was not done on the spur of a moment. A lot of work went in to say how can we save what we have? And so our Department of Facilities and Parks did a great job of looking at it and said, yes, we need to support and protect 150 feet on our north end because it's eroding very fast and we're going to lose so much property that it'll cost us a lot of money just to repair our parking lot. Plus the fact that at this time, there's no intention of rip-wrapping the further south. And just what we heard, there's a big bluff there and it would cost a lot of money to do that. So we're simply protecting our asset and we need to protect 150 feet of it. That's the very, very minimum. And it's not that big of a slope and we still can protect it. And yes, we will have erosion on the south end. And yes, we'll have more exposure of the items that we were talking about. But I certainly wish and hope that we pass this amendment this resolution for the first 75 feet and that we authorize the next 75 feet. Thank you.
Okay, so 2 remaining questions. Todd?
Yeah, just quick and simple. I agree with both Brian and David here in supporting this. I'm not part of that Parks Committee or anything, but I think we should all understand that this water issue is not going away. Water issues are 50-year swings, and it just was quite an anomaly that it came up as quick as what it did. So we're really fighting this for probably better than 10 years or more, and it seems as though we seem to be getting more wind than we've ever had. So we're going to lose more park. There's no doubt about that. And I guess I'm just a little bit confused about how any kind of erosion is good. I think if we're talking about it from a farming perspective or any other perspective, erosion is bad, right? We want to stop erosion. And if there's erosion going on there, whether it's exposing something that we couldn't see before or not, I think it should be stopped. I mean, we're spending millions and millions and billions of dollars throughout this county that we are so proud of, that we've got so much shoreline. Anytime you get a chance to protect it, I think you have to protect it. So notwithstanding, obviously, what's there, I just think it's kind of a no-brainer that you do what you can to protect that. And if you've got money that's being donated, it's even that much more important. So my comments.
Bob, last word.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just doing a little math and just want to point out, think about, because Laura asked a good question, how much of the shore is natural and how much of the shore, will be riprap. We already have about 120 feet of shoreline that's riprap. So whatever you add, you're just adding more riprap and more, engineered surface to your park. So again, I would just argue to do the least amount possible. And I think it's arguable that you wouldn't have to do anything and wait till next year. And again, water's headed down. But again, choice to be made. I just argue, or I would urge to do the least amount possible. Thanks.
Okay, we will go to the voter board.
Again, so this we put in context, again, all you're voting on right now, we had awesome discussion, but you're just voting on accepting a donation from the Friends of the Park.
For the first 75 feet.
Correct.
Let's pass on the vote at 18 yes, 3 nay. Thank you. Resolution 2020-81, transfer of non-budgeted funds to South County Park Shoreline Protection. David.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2020-81.
We got it on the border. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, quick background. Again, the original intent for facilities and parks, we discussed at length, but again, it was the first 75 feet was funded by the Friends of the Parks. They do think that there's opportunities to fund the next 75 feet, although facilities and parks is giving the mobilization costs, and again, based off the amount of erosion that's occurring, there was the recommendation to do the full 150 feet. They made that request to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee then put together identifying where those funds would come from. That would come from our general contingency. But again, there is the possibility that we will get reimbursed through grants that are in the queue already for under consideration. So worst case is you take it out of general contingency. Best case is we get all fully grant funded.
Okay, there you go.
So my interest is this. We know that they can mobilize on the 9th. We know that we have effectively accepted monies for the initial 75 feet. We know that there's new information about the total work being done on the property that might be important to remember. People that enjoy parks don't just like green grass, they also like the natural activities and realities of those parks. And York County has a lot of unusual aspects to their parks. All that being said, what I was looking for is they're going to be able to mobilize at the end of the previous item. We basically granted permission to move forward with the first 75. Is that a correct assumption?
Correct.
Okay. They cannot do that in one day. We meet again on the 10th. Public Facilities and Parks meets again before the 10th, which means we could authorize another 75 feet on the 10th, which would be before they finish the project. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yes, I'd say so. If they begin on the 9th, which sounds like they will, what they're going to do that first day is essentially prep the area for the riprap, so they won't actually be placing anything the first day. So if that change of order came on the second day, that would not be an issue for them.
Okay. So, and they're already prepared to accept a contract of 75 feet. So.
Yes, that's correct. They're prepared for 75 feet or 150 feet.
Okay. So all of that being said, I believe there is tremendous value in being able to review historical aspects of the planet. I would like to see this go back to Facilities and Parks for additional discussion. Come back on the 10th with the continued, with the same identical resolution, because it certainly doesn't need to change. And I would like to know how I can accomplish requesting that.
You could make a motion to table it until the next meeting. Sure.
With an existing motion sitting on the board?
Yeah, I think what you would want to do is refer this back to the Facilities and Parks Committee and postpone consideration of this resolution until the next meeting, which is November 10th.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to refer this back to the committee and postpone this decision making
can't.
That's what I'm getting at.
Well, yeah, procedurally, because there's a motion on the floor.
That's what I'm getting at.
Table, you can do a motion. You can, a table can supersede.
Well, actually, tabling is an incorrect motion.
I know.
And that's why the motion should be postponed consideration to November 10th and then refer back. And I think the motion to postpone consideration would take precedent over the existing motion. And then you could just simply refer back to Facilities and Parks Committee.
And then we would, someone would have to second that. And then we would vote on that. And if that fails, then we would go back to the original motion. Then I would make that motion to send it back to the committee for reconsideration to be back on the agenda for.
No.
You can't do that. There's a motion.
A motion to postpone.
Make a motion to postpone. Greg, you want to restate the wording since I should be the one saying it?
You want to make a motion to postpone consideration of resolution number 2020-81 until the November 10th county board meeting, and then there would be a vote on that. And then this body could just decide by consensus to refer the matter back to Facilities and Parks and ask them to report back to this county board on November 10th.
Okay, so then I would like to make a motion to postpone consideration of resolution 2020-81 until our next regular county board meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
So does the motion for postpone override discussion existing?
Yes. I want to caution I'm being picky, but it's not a regular meeting because the meeting is our budgetary, is our annual meeting. So I'd rather say November 10th. So
Yes. I'll correct my wording to November 10th meeting.
And much like a tabling motion, this, aside from an explanation of why we're postponing, it's not debatable.
Okay. Right, so it's a non-debatable motion, so by voice vote, if you agree to a postponing motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye. Nay.
Okay. We're gonna need to go to voter board.
I have a request to speak before we make that motion.
You can't, the motion overrides the discussion.
I had a request to speak before the motion that postponed.
Can I clarify? So what happens, just from Robert's rules, David had the floor. The fact that he has the floor made a motion, that motion is now on the table. The fact that you're in the queue to speak.
It overrides
all that. The fact that he made a motion just kind of clears the queue.
All I wanted to remind everybody that this is not a motion of the parks. It's a motion of the plate.
He's out of order. You're out of order. You can't talk. Okay.
I know I did so.
You're out of order. Okay.
Just give me one second. Motion to postpone. You ready?
Okay, so this is the motion to postpone.
Can I point something out?
Please.
The underlying resolution, which is to transfer non-budget funds, requires a 2/3 vote of the membership. So you would require 14 votes to adopt. And that probably should be taken into consideration when you're deciding whether or not to vote to postpone consideration, because you might win on the motion to postpone, but then if you're not certain you have 14 votes to have the resolution adopted, then the resolution is dead.
Thank you for that reminder.
You'll probably also come back at a different length next time anyway.
It could come back in a different iteration.
It can come back as a different iteration. It can still go back to the Facilities Park, then it's still come back to the 10.
Okay, so we're going to go to voter board on a motion to postpone.
Really works. I think it works.
As you said, I don't think finance meets before the next county board, so this resolution has to come through finance.
But they wanted to make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay, motion to postpone has priority and we're voting on it.
Are we ready?
Yes. Aaron's gone. Yes, yes, you are. Yes.
Yeah, just.
Okay, the motion to postpone has passed on the vote 11 yes, 9 nay, and 1 absent. So now the next question is, by consensus, do we want to refer this back to Parks? So, yes. Okay, so let's do a consensus vote by raise of hands so we can count. Who wants to refer it back to Parks and Facilities?
I would like to. You can't see my hand.
It came from finance, so does that matter?
Well, it came through finance, but the underlying question as to how many feet to do came out of facilities and parks.
Okay, keep your hands up if you want it referred back.
To finance. I mean, to.
Yes, for Shomo.
I see 16.
Yes, for Shomo.
So we're at 17 or 18 consensus to refer back. So it's referred back to Parks. Reconsider it.
So this, we're all on the same page. What we'll do is we'll put it on the agenda for facilities and parks. They will consider whether or not to do an additional distance beyond the 75 feet that's been, they get authorized to move forward. And they'll have that recommendation back on November 10th. And if we need to have a special meeting of finance to adjust the amount chosen, whether we have to do that.
So we might not necessarily have to do that because the resolution will already be part of the county board packet and we could make an amendment on the floor.
Okay. Would anybody like to take a 5-minute break, please? All right, we'll take a 10-minute break then. Maybe take a 20 after we
Hey, wait a second. I have heat today.